Her daughter dumped a trash bag onto the heirloom rug glass, ashes and all. Ruth didn't raise her voice. She reached for the phone. Emily kept talking, still convinced she owned the house and the history beneath it. By sundown, Ruth had filed the trust revision, burned the old will, and booked the notary. She'd been erased in silence for years. Now the paper would speak louder than blood. We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence, it lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. Ruth's heart cracked the moment Emily dumped that trash bag across her beloved rug. A sickening rustle, a clink of glass, and then silencing an absence of sound so heavy it felt like drowning. The twins, Milo and Caroline, froze mid-step, their sticky popsicles melting unnoticed onto their palms. Somewhere in the kitchen, the clock ticked too loud. Ruth didn't speak. Her eyes fell to the shard blue glass, a fragment from the vase George gave her on their 30th. It caught the light like a wound. The rug beneath it was ivory wool, a wedding gift from her mother, a hand-knotted heirloom she used to roll out only for Christmas. She had kept it spotless for 40 years. Emily stood tall, arms folded, chin lifted, like a judge delivering a sentence. "Clean it like you used to," she said flatly. The words didn't land, they impaled. Ruth's legs moved before her mind did. She reached for the broom tucked beside the pantry, the old reflexes intact. But her hands trembled as she bent. Not from age Ruth had done yoga until last year, but from humiliation so sharp it made her stomach twist. Caroline whimpered. "Why is Mom yelling at Nana?" Emily's gaze didn't flicker. Ruth forced herself upright, pressing her palm to the wall for balance. "Go upstairs, kids," she said softly, not looking at them. "Go play with the building blocks." "But the Legos are in the basement," Milo mumbled. "I said upstairs." Her voice was calm, almost too calm. The children obeyed. They always obeyed Ruth. When their footsteps faded, Ruth stood for a moment, staring at the broken blue sliver. Then she turned and walked not to the kitchen, not to the broom but to the stairs. She climbed slowly, each creak beneath her bare feet echoing louder than Emily's insult. At the landing, she paused. Her breath was shallow, her hand white-knuckled on the banister. She could smell George's cologne still faintly in the hallway air, though it had been gone from the bottle for a year now. His absence pressed in. In her bedroom, she shut the door with the gentlest click. No tears came. She sat on the edge of the bed, opened the drawer where she kept things Emily didn't know about old letters, faded keys, the note George wrote before his final surgery. She took out her phone. Her fingers hovered above the screen. Then she typed, "I'm updating the will." She hesitated only a moment before sending it to Grace. The silence afterward felt like an inhale held too long. Seconds passed. The rug downstairs would be stained by now. Emily wouldn't clean it. She never had. The phone buzzed. A single reply. "Send it now." Ruth's throat tightened. Not at the message, at what it meant. Grace didn't ask why. She didn't need to. She had known. All along. Ruth reached for the fireproof box under her bed. The key was still taped inside her old day planner, page the 14th of February. She hadn't needed to look, it had lived there for decades. She clicked the lock open. Inside, her original will, a flash drive, the notarized letter she and George signed after the incident with Emily in 2012. Ruth pulled it all out and laid it across the comforter. Then she heard its footsteps. Soft ones, deliberate. Not the children. "Emily, closer." Grace replies, "Send it now." Every frayed thread of that rug echoed the unraveling trust between Ruth and Emily. The morning light poured in sideways through the bay window, catching every cruel imperfection in the once pristine rug. Ruth stood in her robe, a coffee cup trembling in her grasp, as she stared at the damage like it was a battlefield. Threads frayed outward like spider legs. The blue glass had been picked up, but the gouge in the fabric remained deep and irreversible. From the hallway came the soft murmur of cartoons and cereal clinking in bowls. Emily sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone with forced nonchalance, her back rigid. She didn't look up when Ruth entered. Didn't offer a word. Didn't offer coffee. Ruth said nothing either. She poured water from the kettle into her mug, and the hiss of steam filled the silence like an accusation. Caroline poked her head in. "Nana, can we paint after breakfast?" Ruth gave her a small smile. "Of course, darling. Use the plastic sheets from the closet. The rug stays off limits." Caroline nodded and disappeared. Emily's knuckles tightened on her mug. "Maybe we should just roll it up. It's looking tired." Ruth didn't take the bait. She stirred her tea slowly, the spoon clinking against the ceramic. When the children went upstairs, Ruth stepped onto the back porch, phone in hand. The morning air was cool but not crisp, more like something bracing itself for heat. She tapped Grace's name. The line picked up on the first ring. "I don't want to do something I'll regret," Ruth whispered, "but I can't pretend anymore. Not after yesterday." Grace's voice was steady, as always. "Then don't pretend. But don't act just to act either. Act when it counts." Ruth sank into the wicker chair, her gaze drifting toward the garden beds George once tended. "I can't rush, but I must act." A pause. "Then plan," Grace said. "And protect what matters to you, not what keeps Emily comfortable." Inside, the door creaked. Ruth turned just in time to see Emily glance through the glass, checking, not watching. She disappeared back into the hallway. Ruth ended the call. Later, alone in the den, she opened the drawer beneath the television and pulled out her old sewing kit. The threads were still neatly looped, tiny color-coded spools she hadn't touched in a year. Her fingers hovered over the needle pouch. She didn't want to mend the rug knot yet, but touching the kit brought back memories of mending broken things that could be fixed. She heard the shuffle of Emily's footsteps behind her and tensed. "You're still clinging to that thing?" Emily's voice was sharp. "It's a rug, not a legacy." Ruth stood without turning. "Some things are worth mending." Emily snorted. "Then you'll love this. There's a leak under the bathroom sink." Again. "Then call a plumber." "No," Emily snapped. "You call one. It's your house, your mess." She spun on her heel, muttering something about mildew and rot, and stalked down the hallway. A moment later, the bathroom door slammed. Ruth exhaled slowly. Her hand moved to the sewing kit again. Not to fix, but to decide. A drip echoed from the bathroom pipe. One drop, then another, like a countdown, steady and relentless. Water poured in with it, Ruth's rising resolve. It began with a sound Ruth couldn't place at first, subtle, persistent, wrong. She stepped into the hallway barefoot, instinct tugging her faster than thought. Cold licked at her toes. The water had already spread. Her eyes followed the glistening trail to the bathroom. The door stood ajar. Inside, the pipe beneath the sink had split wide open. A glossy stream poured out like it had been waiting for permission. It ran in looping circles across the tile, seeping into the hallway wood. Emily stood off to the side. Her arms were crossed, but not in defiance. Something closer to detachment. She didn't speak, didn't move, just watched. Ruth didn't stop to question. She dropped to her knees and reached for the closest towel by the laundry bin. Then another. She moved swiftly old joints, forgotten pressing the terry cloth down to halt the spreading pool. The cold soaked through her robe and sleeves, but she didn't flinch. Emily finally said, "I heard a knock in the pipe earlier. I didn't think it'd break." Ruth kept her eyes on the floor. They always break when ignored. There was no reply, only the trickle of water and the sound of her own pulse beating in her ears. She shoved another towel into the leak's path, then another. Each movement was purposeful, each press fueled by something deeper than urgency. Her phone vibrated from the console table in the hall. Ruth stood slowly, wiped her fingers, and checked the screen. "Grace, are you ready?" The words felt like a pause in the world. She didn't respond yet. Her gaze returned to the hallway floor. The worst of the flood was contained, but the wood bore the shine of damage, the kind that lingered, like memory. Ruth whispered, "To no one, after I steady." She moved past Emily without a word and headed toward the bedroom. Her wet robe clung to her knees. The house was quiet except for the muted drip still echoing from the bathroom. She reached her door and froze. Water had made it here too. It had crept under the frame in delicate fingers, staining the carpet darker along its edge. She rushed inside. The fireproof box still under the bed. She dropped to the floor, dragging it out. It felt heavier than it should have, damp on one side. Her breath caught. She clicked it open. Inside, the documents were wet. Not soaked, but warped. She peeled back the first layer's insurance records, George's pension letter, until she reached what she feared most. The will. Its corners were soaked. She unfolded the pages slowly, laying them out on the mattress one by one. Page 1. Readable. Page 2. Blurred at the bottom. The final page, the signature sheet, was the worst. George's name. Intact. Ruth's. Smudged, but legible. Then her eyes dropped to the last line. The final beneficiary. The name was there, but only in suggestion. The ink had bled outward. Letters, merging into one ghostly smear. A beginning G, or maybe an E, followed by nothing clear. Her throat closed. Behind her, a soft step in the hallway. Emily's voice unsure. Is it bad? Ruth didn't answer. She pressed the paper gently with both hands, as if warmth might restore the truth. But the name, whoever it was now a blur. Her fingers trembled. One name, one future, and now, only a question where an answer used to be. Ruth wiped dust from her desk, seeking clarity to change her course. The morning haze lingered in the corners of the room as Ruth pulled the desk chair back with a soft scrape. She hadn't sat here in months, maybe longer. The roll-top desk had once been George's place for letters and taxes, then hers for garden notes and birthday lists. Now it was something else entirely, an altar for a reckoning. She ran her fingers across the wood, tracing the thin film of dust, a relic of inattention. She wiped it clean with the edge of her sleeve and lifted the lid. Inside, the desk smelled faintly of cedar and thyme. She moved her sewing kit neatly organized, untouched since yesterday's hesitation. Its presence no longer brought comfort, only clarity. Some things could be mended, some had to be remade. With slow precision, she laid the damp will on the desk's surface. The paper curled at the corners, still pocked with water scars. But the top sheet's names, intentions were intact. Mostly. The signature page, though, remained a smudged mystery. She placed a paperweight on each end and sat with her hands in her lap. The phone rang. Not a buzz. A full ring. Grace. Ruth answered immediately. It's confirmed, Grace said. He's available by video this evening. Notary, full credentials. Whatever you need. Ruth closed her eyes. Even tonight? Yes, Grace replied. He knows what this means. He's willing. Ruth looked at the desk again, her reflection barely visible in the sheen of the paper. Her voice didn't waver. Then tonight, it is. After the call, she opened the side drawer and pulled out a notebook. Not the lined one for lists. This one had thick, cream pages. The kind George once called serious paper. She flipped to a clean sheet. With slow, deliberate strokes, she began to write. Her intentions. Her final wishes. Her truth. Each sentence landed with gravity, but not sorrow. She was beyond that now. She had hovered in grief too long over George, over Emily, over all the cracks she once tried to patch with silence. Not today. She read the words aloud once, then twice. Her voice filled the small room, not loud, but grounded, steady. Then she tapped the voice recorder app on her phone. She looked at the red blinking light and said quietly, "This is Ruth Eleanor Whitmore. If you're listening, I've made my decision. Breathe, then proceed." She paused. Then she pressed stop. Outside, the house was quiet again. No cartoons, no kitchen clatter. Only the faint wind against the windows and the hollow ache of waiting. She opened her calendar app, found the evening slot Grace had reserved, and added the notary call with a firm tap of her finger. The screen flashed a soft confirmation. 6:30 p.m. notary, personal will update. Then Ruth stood, opened the bottom drawer of the desk, and slipped the notebook and salvaged documents into a folder. She clicked the lock shut. The tiny key, still warm from her palm, she hung on a nail inside the closet door, a habit she hadn't used in years. She straightened, smoothed her blouse, and caught her own eyes in the hallway mirror. They were clearer than she remembered. A floorboard creaked below. Ruth turned her head. Footsteps. Heavy, certain. Emily's shoes on the hardwood, moving through the living room. Getting closer. Ruth stepped toward the landing. The sound of her daughter's heels approached one step at a time. Emily slid coffee to Ruthin and tense between them. The mug clinked too hard against the table. Ruth glanced down. Coffee black, no sugar, just the way she drank it. Emily didn't sit. She stood with one hand on the back of the chair across from Ruth, gaze drifting somewhere over Ruth's shoulder, like she was looking for an exit that didn't exist. Her presence filled the room, not loud, but inescapable, like fog. "Thank you," Ruth said, her voice even. Emily gave the smallest nod and retreated to the other side of the kitchen, leaning against the counter like a stranger in someone else's house. Ruth took a sip. Bitter. Overbrewed. But it grounded her. The silence wrapped itself around them. Neither warm nor hostile, just unbearably taut. The clock above the stove ticked louder than usual, its rhythm indifferent to what had passed between mother and daughter the night before. Emily's fingers tapped idly against the tile. Her eyes flicked toward the hallway, then toward the desk, then back to Ruth. Ruth didn't move. She didn't offer anything, not even her expression. Her hands rested calmly on either side of the mug, her body still as glass. A long breath escaped Emily. "I'll be back before lunch," she said, her voice lower than usual. "Groceries." Ruth nodded once. Not dismissive, just acknowledgement. Emily paused at the doorway. For a second, Ruth thought she might turn back, say something, ask, but she didn't. She left. The door closed with a hush. Not slammed, just gone. Ruth sat alone in the kitchen, the mug cooling in her hands. She looked down at it half full, the swirl of steam fading into the air. Then her phone buzzed beside her. She didn't rush to check it. Eventually, she picked it up. "Grace, executor needs the signed will. Can you send today?" Ruth stared at the message. Her thumb hovered over the keyboard, then pulled back. Instead, she set the phone down and stood. The house was silent again. She moved slowly down the hall, her slippers brushing the hardwood. Each step measured, though her mind wasn't still, it pulsed with memory. The look in Emily's eyes last night, the hesitation, the recognition. She had seen the notary. She had seen the pen. And now this strange calm. This coffee. Ruth reached the study door and opened it. The desk remained as she'd left it. Immaculate. Undisturbed. She walked toward it, pulled the chair back, and sat. Her fingers reached toward the bottom drawer. The lock clicked. Ruth's breath caught. The moment had returned paper, power, and choice. Mrs. Diaz's arrival brought kindness and a reminder. Eyes are watching. The knock was gentle, almost hesitant. Not Emily's rhythm, not the children's. Ruth pulled open the door to find Mrs. Diaz standing with a red plastic tray wrapped in cellophane. Oatmeal raisin, by the smell still warm, flecked with cinnamon. "I thought you could use a little sweetness today," the older woman said. Voice light, but eyes sharp with knowledge. Ruth managed a half smile. "You always show up at the right time." Mrs. Diaz stepped inside, careful with her shoes on the mat. Her gaze drifted past Ruth into the quiet house. "It's too quiet," she said softly. "A house like this deserves more peace than tension." They sat at the breakfast nook, where the light filtered through the blinds and caught dust in the air. Ruth poured them both tea. Mrs. Diaz set the cookies between them. After a long sip, she said, "You know, people talk, especially when cars arrive late and leave early. Notaries in suits don't blend into a neighborhood like ours." Ruth didn't respond immediately. She placed her teacup down with care. Mrs. Diaz leaned forward, gentler now. "You deserve respect, Ruth, from everyone in your home, including her." The room filled with a hush. The name wasn't spoken, but it didn't need to be. Ruth nodded once. Small, almost imperceptible, but it said everything. They sat for several more minutes, quietly nibbling cookies, letting the quiet fill the cracks. Then, Mrs. Diaz stood. Her hand hovered over Ruth's shoulder for a second, then settled gently. When Ruth walked her to the door, Mrs. Diaz paused, glancing over her shoulder. That sewing kit in the study? It hasn't moved in years, but I saw you carry it the other morning. Ruth looked up, startled. Mrs. Diaz only smiled. When women make decisions, the good ones ripple. People feel it, even before they understand it. Then she left, as gently as she came. Ruth stood in the doorway a moment longer. The afternoon was still but not silent. A car door closed next door. A sprinkler hissed faintly across the lawn. And in the far right window, behind a fluttering curtain, someone pulled back just in time. A neighbor. Watching. Rumors always started in moments like these. Ruth knew. A widow's resolve made people curious, especially when that widow had a daughter with a voice like vinegar and a presence that carried storms. She returned inside and closed the door behind her. By mid-afternoon, the house felt like it was bracing itself. Shadows crept into the corners. The air felt heavier, though nothing had changed. Then came the knock. This one was different. One pause. Then 3 quiet raps, like someone who needed courage just to try. Ruth opened the study door slowly and stepped into the hall. Emily stood outside the kitchen, her hand still near the frame. Her hair was pulled back, tight and trembling. "I must speak with you," she said. Her voice wasn't sharp. It wasn't cold. It was shaking. Ruth didn't answer. Not yet. Emily's eyes shimmered in the edge of something. Confession or collapse? Emily's hidden debts tumbled out and Ruth was ready to catch them. Emily stood just inside the doorway, her back straight but her shoulders taut like a rope pulled too tight for too long. Ruth gave a small nod, then motioned to the kitchen. They walked without speaking. The house held its breath. Ruth sat first, hands folded calmly in front of her. Emily hovered for a second before finally pulling out the chair across from Hearth, the same one she'd ignored that morning over coffee. She looked thinner in the afternoon light. Not physically just, worn, transparent in a way Ruth wasn't used to. "I've been avoiding this," Emily began, her voice low. The words almost stuck in her throat. "For months." Ruth didn't speak. Her stillness gave permission. Emily swallowed hard. "It's not just stress, or being angry. It's things got out of hand, fast, and I didn't want to ask for help." Ruth nodded once. Encouraging, not pressing. Emily exhaled, the kind of breath that meant she was letting go of something she'd clutched too long. "I'm behind on rent, on my apartment back in Portland. They sent the second warning last week." Ruth's fingers tensed slightly, but her face remained unchanged. "I maxed out my cards trying to float things until I figured out the next step. Grocery deliveries, the flight here, some medical co-pays, then the car. God, the repairs." Her voice cracked. She looked away. "I was too proud to admit it, and I've been awful. I know. Mean. But I didn't know how to be vulnerable without it feeling like failure." The air felt thick with truth. Ruth leaned back slightly, studying her daughter with clear eyes. What she saw wasn't just desperation. It was humility, earned through exhaustion. "I'm listening," Ruth said quietly. "And I'm here." Emily nodded quickly, wiping at her cheek with the back of her hand. "I don't want to be rescued. I want to be respected, and to get my life back without pretending I'm fine." Ruth tilted her head slightly. "So tell Mido you want support or independence?" Emily hesitated. Then, firm as she'd ever been, "Respect, without rescue." Ruth stood without a word and walked to the cabinet beside the desk. She returned with a pad of graph paper and a pen, laying them out like a contract. "We'll create a repayment plan," Ruth said. "Every debt listed, every dollar tracked. You'll pay it down over time. I'll front the start. You earn the finish." Emily stared at the notepad, then up at her mother. Her voice cracked again, barely above a whisper. Okay. They spent the next 20 minutes listing amounts, lenders, dates. Ruth asked precise questions. Emily answered with a new kind of honesty, quiet, but unwavering. When they were done, Ruth reached for the old tin box beside the desk. The sewing kit. She opened it gently, revealing the tidy rows of thread, buttons, and needles. She pulled out a spool of pale blue, George's favorite color. I keep this kit here, she said, not just to fix things, but to remind me what's worth the work. Emily watched her. Then, slowly, she smiled. Not wide, but real. Together they stood. Ruth placed the sewing kit in one arm, the debt plan in the other. Outside, the trash bins waited at the curb, still full of remnants from the previous days. Broken glass, torn paper, the last of what needed to go. Without a word, Ruth and Emily stepped out the front door. Shoulder to shoulder, the evening breeze tugged at their hair. They reached the bin. Ruth lifted the lid. Emily dropped in the last black trash bag together this time, not alone. They scrubbed Dish's sand, scrubbed away years of unspoken hurt. The sink filled slowly with warm, soapy water. Ruth rolled up her sleeves, her wrists pale and spotted with age. Emily handed her a chipped plate without a word, then took the dish towel in her own hands. They worked in rhythm. Glass, then fork, pan, then bowl. The quiet between them was no longer stiff. It breathed. It moved. Emily broke it first. I was cruel, I know that. Ruth didn't stop scrubbing. Her hands worked a familiar circle over a coffee cup rim. Emily set a rinsed spoon on the rack. I blamed you for being strong when I felt weak. That wasn't fair. Ruth finally looked at her. The sponge in her hand paused. And I was silent when I should have spoken, Ruth said gently. For too long. Emily nodded, eyes focused on the soapy bubbles dancing in the drain. I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed to say it. Ruth rinsed the last dish, water splashing against her hands. You already earned something better than forgiveness. You earned a second chance. They stood in the echo of that sentence. Then, Ruth reached for the towel and dried her hands. The repayment plan still stands, she said, folding the towel. But so do new terms. Emily arched an eyebrow. Terms? Mutual respect. No shouting. No vanishing. We speak. We listen. We disagree with dignity. Emily exhaled, almost smiling. And you? I'll do the same. I'll stop protecting you so much that it becomes control. That stops now. Emily nodded slowly, as if letting the words settle somewhere new inside her. Deal, she whispered. Every part of it. Then, without planning, they stepped toward each other. Ruth opened her arms brief. Unsure, but Emily filled the space like she'd been waiting all her life. They hugged, tightly. Two strong women standing where the air had once been broken. When they pulled apart, Ruth reached for the kettle. Tea? Emily grinned faintly. Only if it's not that bitter blend. Ruth laughed softly, her chest easing in a way it hadn't in weeks. Mint and honey it is. As the water began to boil, Ruth's phone buzzed on the counter. A single message from Grace lit the screen. Grace. Executor awaits your envelope. Ruth's fingers tightened around the phone for a beat. Then she nodded to herself, turned off the burner, and walked toward the study. Emily didn't follow. Inside, the light had softened through the curtains. The desk looked cleaner, now not just tidied, but emotionally cleared. Ruth opened the drawer with the tiny brass key she'd tucked into the planter last week. The envelope was there thick, sealed, her signature pressed against the seam. She lifted it carefully, hands steady, then paused. Her thumb rested on the flap. The edge of the seal pressed faintly into her skin. Her eyes burned, just slightly. So much ink on paper. So many choices in one place. Ruth stood frozen, envelope in hand. Behind her, the sound of Emily's laughter drifted faintly from the kitchen for the first time in years. Ruth mailed the envelope and forgiveness journeyed with it. The sun hung low, casting warm shadows that stretched long across the sidewalk. Ruth held the envelope in her right hand, close to her chest, as she walked beside Emily. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. Their pace matched, slow and deliberate, like they were carrying something sacred between them. The mailbox stood at the corner of their street, an old blue relic with scratched paint and a dent near the base. Ruth stopped in front of it, the envelope cradled in both hands now. She didn't hesitate. She lifted the lid and slid the will through the slot. It slipped down with a soft whoosh, vanishing into the dark. Emily let out a breath that sounded too much like a release. Ruth gave her a gentle glance, then started walking again, this time toward the garden. "Let's sit a moment," she said. They settled onto the small bench beneath the climbing wisteria. It was where George used to read the paper on Sunday mornings. Ruth leaned back, her hands folded on her lap. "I drafted the repayment terms," she said softly. 3 years. Equal monthly installments. No interest, but with accountability. Emily didn't flinch. "Fair." "I'll hold you to it," Ruth added, though her tone held no edge. "I want you to." They sat a while longer in quiet. Bees hummed near the blossoms. A distant lawnmower droned somewhere 2 houses away. It wasn't silence. Not really. It was presence. After a time, Emily turned to her mother. "Thank you." Ruth looked at her, brows lifting slightly. "For not rescuing me," Emily continued, "but not abandoning me either." Ruth reached over, laid a hand on her daughter's knee. "We do the hard things for the people we still believe in." The wind shifted, and a few petals drifted down between them like confetti from something gently celebrated. "I was thinking," Emily said slowly, "about volunteering." Ruth tilted her head, curious. "I saw this local women's center in the paper," Emily explained. "They do clothes drives, resume coaching, workshops for women coming out of financial abuse. I think we could do something together, useful." Ruth nodded slowly, her expression unreadable at first, then softened. "Yes. We can make space for others now. We have space again." Emily smiled full and honest this time. Ruth hadn't seen that version of her daughter in years. Back inside, Ruth's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. She picked it up and read the message from Grace. "Grace, all received. Executor file confirmed. We're official." Ruth turned the screen to Emily, who read it and gave a short, quiet laugh of disbelief. "So that's it," Emily said. "It's done." "It's begun," Ruth corrected. A beat of stillness passed. Then Emily reached for her phone and opened her photos. She scrolled for a moment, then paused on an Imaja, bright, gap-toothed girl with huge brown eyes and 2 braids. "Aisha's on mid-break next week," Emily said. "She misses the garden. Misses you." Ruth looked down at the photo, her throat tightening in the kindest way. Emily hesitated. "Can she stay with us?" Ruth met her daughter's gaze steady and warm. Then she smiled, the yes already there, and nodded firmly. Aisha's arrival carried hope and lit a spark in their living room. The front door creaked open just after noon. Light poured through as Aisha stepped inside, clutching her canvas backpack like a charm. She wore a sunflower yellow hoodie and jeans with tiny paint smudges on the knees. "Hi, Nana Ruth," she said brightly, setting the bag down near the shoe rack. "It smells like chamomile and something safe." Ruth chuckled from the kitchen. "That's probably Emily's new lavender cleaner. Come in, sweetheart." Emily appeared behind her daughter, brushing the travel hair off her shoulders. She wouldn't stop talking about the garden the whole flight. Aisha turned in a full circle, taking in the familiar furniture, the glints of morning light on the hardwood, the little potted cactus she painted last spring still on the windowsill. "This place feels like someone lives here on purpose," she said, voice warm and eyes wide. Ruth's smile deepened. "That's because we do." In the kitchen, the kettle sang softly. Ruth poured 3 cups of tea mint and honey, of course, and placed them on the tray she hadn't used since George's last birthday. When she set it down on the living room table, Aisha gasped. "You always had the best cups. They look like storybooks." Ruth handed one over, the china warmed by the steam. "Good cups make you speak like the person you want to become." They sipped together, surrounded by the quiet clink of spoons and the hum of spring through the windows. Emily settled into the armchair, her face softer than it had been in years. Aisha's voice cut gently through the calm. I've been thinking about my senior project. I want to start a scholarship. Ruth raised an eyebrow, surprised but intrigued. I mean, Aisha continued, not just money, a legacy. For women like Mom, or women like you were, people starting over, sewing kits, grocery help, laptops. I want to name it after someone who chose to rebuild instead of disappear. Emily looked over, blinking rapidly. Ruth stared at her tea, the spoon resting still now. And who would that be, sweetheart? Aisha didn't hesitate. You, Nana. The Ruth Fund or something better. Something with meaning. I want to build something that doesn't vanish when we do. The room held its breath. Emily reached over and took Aisha's hand. That's the spark you get from her, she whispered. Ruth didn't reply right away. She just studied her granddaughter's face, young and sure, and full of something she remembered from long ago. Not just hope. Direction. Her phone buzzed gently on the side table. One new message. Grace. Executor meet tomorrow. We'll finalize the paperwork. Ruth read it, set the phone down, and turned to Aisha. Her voice was low, unwavering. Let's build this. Ruth's will transformed into purpose more than paper, a promise. The sunlit office smelled faintly of polished wood and printer ink. Ruth sat at the long walnut table beside Emily, both of them upright but relaxed. At the head of the table, a soft-spoken man in a slate suit adjusted his glasses. The executor, Mr. Conrad. Aisha sat quietly in the corner, scribbling in a notebooker, eyes bright, alert. Ruth had insisted she come, even if she didn't speak. Observe what legacy looks like in motion, she'd said. Mr. Conrad glanced at the folder in front of him, then at Ruth. We've reviewed the updated clauses. One stands out. Ruth folded her hands on the table. The scholarship, he continued, is bold, significant, but you've redirected substantial assets away from traditional heirs, your daughter included. He paused delicately, eyes flicking to Emily. Emily didn't flinch. Ruth leaned forward. I've ensured Emily's future through structured support. This, she gestured gently toward the clause outlined in red ink, is about the future beyond us. The Ruth Eleanor Whitmore Fund is not about inheritance. It's about reinvestment. Mr. Conrad nodded, clearly impressed. You're stating, then, that your legacy thrives not on private holdings, but community impact. Yes, Ruth said simply. It always did. Emily reached for her mother's hand under the table. They didn't clasp tightly, just a touch of shared understanding. Mr. Conrad turned a few pages, found what he needed, then passed the final revision across the table. We've included the scholarship in perpetuity clause. It's eligible for nonprofit status. It will outlive all of us, as intended. Ruth accepted the pen he offered. Her signature was slow, deliberate. When the pen stopped moving, the air shifted. Emily stood without prompting. I'd like to witness the signature. Mr. Conrad nodded and handed her the second pen. As she signed her name beside her mother's, she looked up with something fierce behind her eyes. Not anger this time, pride. Aisha beamed quietly in the corner, biting her lip to keep from cheering. When the papers were stamped, filed, and sealed in a thick manila envelope, Ruth pushed back her chair and stood. I have one final step, she said. They returned home mid-afternoon, the house welcoming in a way it hadn't always been. Ruth walked directly to the cabinet in her study, the narrow one with the brass latch George had built for her threads. Inside, the sewing kit waited. She lifted it, paused for a breath, then placed it back with care. She closed the cabinet door slowly, locked it. The key slipped into a drawer she no longer kept hidden. Emily leaned against the doorway, watching. You're sure? Ruth turned. This time, yes. I'm not just leaving something behind. I'm shaping what comes next. Emily nodded. It's beautiful. Ruth walked into the kitchen. Aisha sat at the table, sipping tea, sketching a loga needle, and thread curling around a sunburst. Ruth kissed her temple. It's yours to lead one day. Aisha grinned. Then I better make it count. Ruth's phone buzzed again. She picked it up and smiled. Grace. Unveiling ceremony next week. Dress nice. Press invited. Ruth looked at the message, then up at Emily and Aisha. Her voice, quiet but certain. Then let them see everything we've built. When Ruth's name graced the plaque, silence spoke louder than applause. The folding chairs were arranged in tidy rows beneath a white canopy, its corners rustling gently in the spring wind. At the front, a small podium flanked a navy cloth draped over a bronze plaque. Behind it stood the board, the mayor, the local press, and Ruth. She wore her best navy suit, the one with the silver buttons George always said brought out her strength. Emily stood just off stage in a soft blue dress, her hands clasped, her eyes already glassy with emotion. Aisha sat in the front row, legs crossed, sketchbook clutched against her chest like armor and offering. The host stepped to the mic. Today we honor a woman whose legacy reaches beyond family, beyond finances, beyond fear. Please welcome the founder of the Ruth Eleanor Whitmore Fund. Applause rose not thunderous, but thick with warmth. Ruth stepped up to the podium, her heels careful on the platform. She took a breath, let the wind calm her heartbeat, and began. When I was young, she said, voice steady, I was taught to save money, appearances, silence, but no one taught me to invest. Not in myself, not in others. That came later. She paused, letting her eyes move across the faces before her. Neighbors, friends, strangers, now leaning forward. This fund isn't charity, it's correction, it's celebration, it's a seed. She turned briefly toward Emily, then to Aisha. It is built not from wealth, but from hard-won clarity. Applause again short, respectful, stirred with something more than approval. The host returned, hand outstretched. Miss Whitmore, would you do the honors? Ruth moved toward the cloth, fingers brushing the edge. She pulled it free in one clean motion. The plaque gleamed. The Ruth Eleanor Whitmore Fund. For women rebuilding, reclaiming, rising. Silence followed. And in that stillness came something holy. Respect. Emily pressed her hand to her mouth. A tear slipped free, but she didn't hide it. The crowd broke into applause, now louder, freer, fuller. A young woman stepped up next, barely 19. Thin braids twisted neatly back. She held a folded paper in trembling hands. I'm one of the first scholarship recipients, she said. I came from a shelter. I came from nothing, but because of this, she pointed gently toward Ruth. I'm standing on solid ground. I'm writing again. I'm living again. As she read her letter aloud, Ruth listened not just with her ears, but with her entire body. Every syllable felt like an echo of something she never knew she needed to hear. After, a cameraman waved for attention. Ma'am, Channel 6 is here, the reporter said gently. Could we get a quote for the community segment? Ruth blinked, surprised by her own quiet smile. Then she stepped forward as the mic turned to her words, waiting, ready to live outside her. Later, the quiet held more warmth than any applause. The house felt different that night. Still, yes, but not the kind of stillness that once came with tension. This quiet hummed with presence. Ruth and Emily sat curled on opposite ends of the living room couch, a soft quilt stretched between them. On the coffee table, a tablet glowed with fresh photos from the ceremony. Aisha had emailed them minutes after editing clean frames. Candid smiles, every shot pulsing with sunlight and grace. Emily swiped slowly. Look at your face in this one. Ruth leaned in. Her smile in the photo was wide, caught mid-laugh beside the mayor. I look like someone else. No, Emily said softly. You look like yourself, finally seen. The doorbell chimed once, then again, too quick to be a stranger. Emily stood and returned with a small basket wrapped in cellophane. A ribbon curled from its handle. From Mrs. Diaz, she said, placing it beside the tablet. She says she saw the Channel 6 segment, and she claims full rights to being your first public supporter. Ruth chuckled. She's not wrong. Inside the basket, homemade scones, lavender soap, and a simple card that read, Your name belongs on walls. Always did. The photo stream ended, and the screen dimmed. Above the mantel, newly hung, The plaque caught the lamplight. The same one unveiled hours earlier now lived among family portraits and faded handprints from when Aisha was 3. Ruth rose and turned off the overhead light. In the warm dimness, the plaque's bronze letters gleamed like something living. She turned back to Emily. "You did good today," Ruth said. Emily smiled and reached beneath the couch cushion. "So did you, and you'll need this." She handed Ruth a wrapped bundle linen tied with a string. Ruth unwrapped it slowly. Inside, a scrapbook. The cover read, "Built, not inherited." Each page overflowed with pieces of their journey, Emily's original repayment plan, Aisha's scholarship sketch, Grace's first text, a photo of the torn rug from the morning everything cracked. Ruth touched the page corners like they might bruise. "You remembered it all." Emily nodded. It mattered. Ruth didn't cry, but something deeper shifted in her chest. In the kitchen, the kettle hissed. Without a word, they rose and moved together, steeped the mint, poured into china cups. Back on the couch, the steam curled between them, the air warm with ritual. Ruth lifted her cup. To not saving, but investing. Emily clinked hers, in others, and each other. They drank, silence holding them like arms. The door creaked open. Aisha peeked in, then stepped forward with a white envelope. Mail came late. She handed it to Ruth and curled beside her on the couch. The letter was handwritten, the paper lined and folded 3 times. "Dear Miss Whitmore," it began. "I was told not to expect help, not to ask, not to matter. Then your fund stepped in. You didn't just give me a chance. You restored belief in me." Ruth stopped reading, her throat tightening. Emily placed her hand over Ruth's dadios. Ruth's voice caught as she whispered, "Yes, we did." Emily handed Ruth a cabinet key and their legacy locked into place. Ruth held the letter in both hands, its creases softening beneath her thumbs. She read it again in silence, every word, a thread stitching something new inside her. Not just validation, not just gratitude. It was something else, a knowing. Across from her, Emily sat quietly, tea cooling untouched on the end table. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Ruth folded the letter carefully, with reverence, and tucked it into the scrapbook beside her. Emily rose without a word, crossed to the cabinet in the hallway, and returned with something in her closed fist. She held it out. Her fingers opened. A single brass key lay on her palm. Ruth stared at it, recognizing the cut and curve. The sewing kit lock, the cabinet George had built, the place where stories were kept. Emily didn't explain. She simply placed it in Ruth's palm like an offering, or a crown. Ruth looked down at it for a long beat, then up. Their eyes met. She smiled deep and unhurried, the kind of smile that didn't need to rush because it had already outlived storm and silence. Her voice came quiet. "You're sure?" Emily nodded. "It belongs to you. Always did. But no, it's different." The next morning, the sky cracked open early. A thin lavender hue painted the horizon, soft and promising. The birds weren't singing yet, but the world was stretching its limbs. Ruth tied her scarf carefully beneath her chin. Her coat hung loose but sturdy around her shoulders. She glanced at the cabinet one last time before they left. The sewing kit still rested inside, untouched, sealed, sacred. She locked the cabinet slowly, turned the key, and left it in the bowl beside the door. Symbolic, permanent, not hidden anymore. Emily waited by the porch. Aisha was still asleep upstairs, curled under blankets that smelled like rosemary and mint. Ruth reached for her daughter's hand. They walked down the quiet street, fingers intertwined, not tightly, just enough. Their footsteps were slow but steady, matching each other stride for stride. Ahead, the community center sat glowing faintly in the new light, its windows catching dawn's first glance. Banners still hung from yesterday's ceremony. Petals from the flower girls lingered on the sidewalk. Ruth paused at the top step. She looked at the glass doors, then at the city slowly waking behind her. "We clean up what we care about," she said softly. Emily turned, puzzled. "What?" That rug? Ruth replied with a smile. That old argument. The torn pieces. The broken plate. The stain. I kept cleaning. Not because I had to, but because I couldn't let it be ruined. Emily's eyes welled. You're not the rug, Ruth added, but you were always worth the mending. They stepped inside. The center smelled of fresh paint and lemons. A soft hum buzzed from the lobby light. A stack of new applications sat ready at the desk. Aisha's logo already printed in the corner of every page. Ruth took it all in, the calm, the readiness, the beginning inside the continuation. She didn't say anything more. They stood in the quiet for a long moment. Just the two of them, mother and daughter, no longer rebuilding from ruin, but building forward. From outside, morning filtered in. Their shadows stretched across the polished Tillatois silhouettes, long and steady, stepping into what was next. The glass doors eased shut behind them, and the world, finally, opened.